An apple a day keeps the doctor away, but a glass of OJ keeps the adversary at bay. Here's Odd Job.
Hey, it's time for a glass of OJ. I'm Odd Job. So, as some of you may know, I gave a talk last week at Hacker Summer Camp at B-Sides Las Vegas. It is the first time I have ever given a talk at Hacker Summer Camp. I've been attending DEF CON since year 20. I forget when the first time I attended B-Sides Las Vegas was. Maybe it was DEF CON 21 or 22. But yeah, so I've been attending B-Sides Las Vegas pretty much every year after. I don't always go to DEF CON, but I usually go to B-Sides Las Vegas. Never been to Black Hat. I need to go to Diana Initiative. That's a great one to go to next. And I've been to QueerCon. So great times in Hacker Summer Camp to be had, and recommends anybody in the industry go have some time at Hacker Summer Camp. There are definitely great conversations to have with people, great times to have, training, there's contests, there's great talks and content. There's just a lot of opportunities to get hired. There were a lot of people who were at B-Sides Las Vegas strictly just to hire people. So, in fact, some companies, that's even one of their biggest hiring events for InfoSec in the year. And they may get like a big suite at the Aria or something like that, and basically have you over and do interviews even at the event to kind of get an introduction and get you started in the interview process. So really great place. Go do that. But I was giving a talk, and the talk was about busting biases in InfoSec. And so you can go to the video. It'll be linked down in the doobly-doo. And you can go 55 minutes from the ends, which if you don't know how to do that, you can click on the time or tap on the time in your video as you watch it. You can go from time from the end, or you can also do time to when so far in the video you're at so far. So click on that to make sure you're at minus time, so time until the end, and go to 55 minutes. That's when I'm being introduced. No, it's not a 55-minute talk. I think it's like, it ended up being about 40 or so minutes because there were some questions as well. So go check that out. It was about busting biases in InfoSec. And we first started talking about how exactly the brain works and develops patterns, and how those patterns have developed over the millennia, the millions of years that brains have existed, especially over the tens of thousands of years that humans have been developing patterns in their brains. And we talk about assumptions that we make. I even put my fingers through my glasses because I was wearing lensless frames to essentially show everyone and demonstrate that without thinking about it, you formed an assumption about what's going on up at the stage. That lives at a very unconscious part of your brain that puts together patterns. And even this right now has challenged some of your brain's patterns, and your brain's noticing that. And so we talk about the brain at various levels of consciousness, unconsciousness, kind of the hardware pattern matching of the brain. There's some hardware, there's some firmware, there's some middleware, there's some software, and there's kind of this user space as well of the brain, if you will. So we go through and talk about that. Essentially, biases and assumptions are mostly close to hardware level. Some of them are wired in specifically to connect and favor certain associations, and some of them are a little bit more programmed as we grow up. But assumptions many times are things we have to form. That's what we've done to survive, right? We've made some assumptions, or we have bias when we hear rustling in the trees. Back when we lived in jungles, and back when we lived out in the in places where there would be bushes or trees rustling, and we'd have to determine, okay, is that a predator or is that just the wind? People obviously who matched the patterns correctly for survival survived, and those patterns were more favored in future generations. But at the end of the talk, after the end of the talk, so once the video's gone or off, there was a question that was raised. It was essentially, is there an assumption or bias that could be beneficial, or it could be good to have this assumption? An offered assumption was always assume a firearm is loaded, especially when handling. And I think that's one of the few assumptions that I would also think of on the spot that would be like, yeah, you would want to just make the assumption, yes. Because the negatives to that are very few and probably don't impact anybody negatively, right? And actually only help you survive as well as help you from harming others. Because if you assume a firearm is loaded, you would also want to handle it as a loaded firearm. You'd want to first check to see if it's loaded and, take out any ammunition, of course, but you'd want to be careful where you point it. You'd want to be very conscious about where your finger is and making sure it's not on the trigger. You'd want to do a lot of different things to make sure your handling of the weapon is as if it were loaded. And even if you wanted to do something like cock the hammer back, pull the trigger for a dry fire, though that could be harmful, but we all do a little bit of dry firing anyway, to test out the trigger pull and see how heavy it is. Yeah, we all want to do that. We want to see what the sights look like and function. Well, you do check it's loaded, unloaded, and I do that like 3 or 4 times if I ever handle a firearm. I'm checking it profusely. Yes, this is clear. Yes, that is clear. I check it 3 more times and then go, okay, I am good for the next 30 seconds to complete this action. And still being careful about where I point it to make sure nothing in front of me, nothing around me, and nothing behind the thing I am pointing would cause, if it were loaded, to cause injury. So even then there's hedging around, right? Because the real idea is we assume it's loaded because what if you're wrong, right? What if you're wrong about it being loaded? And it turns out it is loaded, and then someone could die. But what if you assume it's loaded and you're not right and it actually was unloaded? Well, for purposes of just handling or interacting with a firearm, it ends up not hurting anybody, right? So there's everything to gain from assuming this, including everyone around you to gain from assuming that this firearm is loaded, and there's nothing to lose from being wrong about that assumption. The only time when you wouldn't want to make that assumption is if you actually need to use that firearm for the intended purpose of defending yourself or engaging in some kind of lethal action that is legal, or is a part of war. You wouldn't want to necessarily assume, okay, my firearm is loaded. You want to make sure it's loaded beforehand, right? So you'd want to have all that awareness about you. But as far as just going and handling things like that, you have everything to gain and you have nothing to lose from assuming that is a loaded firearm. So we have to make assumptions. We just have to. Your brain is doing it all the time without you consciously thinking about it. So they're unavoidable. And many of them just require no conscious thought to even activate and stimulate and affect your decision making. So it requires no conscious thought whatsoever. Another one that I was thinking about along these lines is assume best intentions rather than malice in the workplace. So if you receive a communication from someone that uses some wording that's a little weird and that you think might be offensive, is it more likely, that this person was trying to be offensive? Assuming best intentions is another good assumption you want to make. You want to bias yourself more towards assuming someone means good, but still, even with that, you want to double check. Just like with the firearm, sure, we're going to assume it's loaded. We're also going to check to make sure it's not loaded, but we're still going to treat it, afterwards as if it is. With the business workplace, assuming best intentions is a good thing. It's what allows us to pause when we see something that seems to be offensive and it's triggered a little bit. So that's that kind of bias towards, oh, wow, someone said something offensive towards me. So there's a bit of a self-bias there. Making the the extra assumption of maybe this person didn't mean this is kind of that anti-pattern you're developing against the pattern that's wired in to just assume that someone meant this terrible thing against you, and maybe it was a reply all, and maybe it was sent out to a bunch of people. This is a great way to actually start removing bias or finding ways of developing patterns in your brain to notice bias more, because if you notice, oh wow, that was a really crappy thing someone just said to me, you might think, well, did they really mean to? I'm going to assume best intentions, but let's also check them. Let's also ask them. Let's also reach out and say, hi, I don't think you meant to say this way, but here's what this makes it look like you're saying. And I just want to double check. Are we good? Is everything okay? Or do we need to talk about something? And, it gives them the opportunity to go, oh no, that is not what I meant. I am totally sorry. I see what you mean by that. Let me send a correction out there, or let me just let you know that was not my intention. It allows you to do that instead of assuming that they meant bad, right? Because then that could end up hurting relationships and even projects and workplaces and add to toxicity later. The old phrase, don't attribute to malice what could more easily be attributed to ignorance, applies very much there. Biases are interesting because they are assumptions in many, if not most cases. They are types of assumptions. But biases are interesting because it's the direction or what scope of attention our assumptions have that matters. So, for instance, many assume males in the jobs that they have are qualified. But as soon as women apply or women are in the workplace, then for some reason qualifications are scrutinized more, I've noticed. One's going to assume that the man that's in the role is an expert until obviously something weird is said or something is really far off, and then has to be challenged. Whereas a woman has to do the opposite, has to establish qualifications. There is an assumption that something may not be completely right just from the outset. Whereas for the male, it is, okay, this seems legit from the outset. If one is just going to have to assume anyway, because those brain patterns exist in all of us, or at least I would say most of us, this is mostly for neurotypical people. I don't know about what biases may or may not commonly impact neurodivergent people. And neurodivergency isn't a monolith, that everybody has a different type of neurodivergency. So some people just can't do empathy at all. Like they just don't understand that. Some people can't understand sarcasm. And so then they can't even identify sarcasm coming out, which again is another good reason to assume best intentions. Even if someone was being sarcastic, ironic, or whatever, they may not have intended to, because they can't necessarily detect that so easily. Their brain doesn't work that way. And so that will also help you to work with people who don't think like you, is to have the assumption of best intentions. But going back to this male versus woman qualification issue here, if one's going to make these assumptions, then women should receive the benefit of that assumption as well, right? But our brains are horrible at that. That's why it's called a bias. It is uneven. You're tending towards something when you wouldn't the other way. So it's literally the definition of bias. You favor with an assumption rather than disfavoring with another. So that's literally that problem. But yeah, so that was a fantastic talk. I loved it. I love this question. And I want to know more from you. What are some of your favorite biases? We talked about a lot of different biases in InfoSec. The prevention bias is a big one, that, money spent in prevention isn't always worth more than money spent in timely detection and response. But so many people have the bias, and this has been studied specifically in InfoSec. So many people have the bias that prevention indeed is more valuable than timely detection and response, even when they're actually the same. So there's that. There's several biases that you can actually go over there and look up. I also noticed last year, I was giving a video. I was in a hot tub, and I brought some recording equipment with me to possibly do some kind of talk, but then realized, oh yeah, I had a hot tub to do it in too, but I just had no time to go and record the video. But so I realized now I need to, in Vegas every year now, make sure I do a hot tub video, because many people ask me, are you doing the hot tub video? So this is going to have to be an annual occurrence at Hacker Summer Camp. OJ does the hot tub video. So, but what types of assumptions do you notice? What types of assumptions do you have and biases do you have? Do you think there are any other good assumptions to make, safe assumptions to make, where it benefits far more than it harms everybody else to have this kind of default assumption, and to encourage that assumption? Assumptions generally are where we don't know, but we insert an assumption for the purpose of survival of some kind, usually, not all the time, or perceived survivability. But yeah, if they're good assumptions, if they're safe assumptions, or even necessary assumptions, then do what you can to try and find a way to apply them equally. Or, as we talked about in the name study in the talk that's, again, linked in the doobly-doo, maybe even try to remove the stimulus of that bias. So if names are a way that you bias, resumes that you receive, make sure that you remove names off resumes in your HR system prior to it coming to you, or as it's coming to you. Make sure those are removed and kind of sanitize those names. So that way the bias doesn't hit you and you see exactly what the qualifications are rather than the name. So your bias doesn't even get a chance to hit in there. But what are your thoughts? Are there safe assumptions to make? Should we make no assumptions whatsoever? Yeah, what did you think of that talk? What do you think of this video? Start a conversation down in the comments. Find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. And I'll see you in the next one.